Yeah, I think like selling to developers in general, developers are a really and well informed client base, and so and they're skeptical as they should be, because most developers, most engineering leaders, they know what tools are out there, they know what they want to use, and so what I've seen work in sales in this space is sales teams and salespeople acting more as facilitators rather than the generic salesperson. And the way we've always approached it with our founders, and specifically in my previous roles, was like, your main goal as a salesperson in this space is to help developers see the value in the product and helps kind of see that vision of, all right, I have this specific problem and this software, this solution, helps solve that and makes my life easier, my team's life easier, or it helps us, save money. And so the sales process in itself in this space is a lot different, whereas, you're not really selling from that first conversation that you're having with them. It's really, how do you remove the friction and help get them into some sort of proof of concept, a trial, and allow them to kind of figure out the value themselves. And your main goal is to just remove those blockers and, help them see the value as quickly as possible.
Welcome to another episode of the Modern DevTool GTM Brew. Today we are diving into a perennially hot topic, which is tracking sales motion for developer tool companies. And we have an incredible conversation lined up for you. My guest today is Luke Bivens. Luke is a seasoned sales professional who has a knack for startup success and is passionate about selling developer tools. He has worn multiple hats in the past in his sales career. He has been the founding account executive at 3 successful tech startups, a sales and growth advisor, and is now the founder of QC Growth, where he provides go-to-market advice to developer tool companies. Luke, welcome to the podcast. Excited to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and really excited to have a chat.
Probably the first thing in my mind when we spoke last time was that you specifically focus on GTM for developer tool companies. So what is the reason for the vertical focus in developer tools? Like, what do you think is different about developer tools, probably in a sales motion or anything like that, where you decided to go vertical?
Yeah. So my background is I've kind of fallen into that founding account executive role, like you said, 3 different times. And it's always been in the B2B startup SaaS space. And for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been in the developer tool space. So I was, the last company I was at was called Gatsby. And I'm sure a lot of people listening in the open source community know what Gatsby is or remember Gatsby from a time ago, which it was an open sourced React-based framework, allowed companies to build really fast websites. And so that's how I was kind of introduced to developer tools. And pretty early on, I realized I really like this space. Selling to developers in general, which I'm sure we'll get into, is a lot different than selling a sales or a marketing software. And so once I left Gatsby to start QC Growth, really saw a need in that space for technical founders, open source developer tools type companies to build that early stage sales motion. So a lot of people start with a really incredible product, but it's hard to kind of build a go-to-market and do that 0 to 1 stage. And so that's why I started QC Growth and how typically the types of companies that we work with.
Yeah, and probably just wanted to double click on that, how you mentioned that the sales to developers is different, the sales of developer tool companies is different. So let's just double click on it, and what makes it different? What do you think is, really the thing here that requires that vertical focus?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think like selling to developers in general, developers are a really and well informed client base, and so and they're skeptical, as they should be, because most developers, most engineering leaders, they know what tools are out there, they know what they want to use, and so what I've seen work in sales in this space is sales teams and salespeople acting more as facilitators rather than the generic salesperson. And the way we've always approached it with our founders, and specifically in my previous roles, was like, your main goal as a salesperson in this space is to help developers see the value in the product, and helps kind of see that vision of, all right, I have this specific problem, and this software, this solution, helps solve that and makes my life easier, my team's life easier, or it helps us, save money. And so the sales process in itself in this space is a lot different. Whereas, you're not really selling from that first conversation that you're having with them. It's really, how do you remove the friction and help get them into some sort of proof of concept, a trial, and allow them to kind of figure out the value themselves. And your main goal is to just remove those blockers and, help them see the value as quickly as possible.
Got it. And say, when you work in this kind of a GTM motion where you are, say, talking to developers and helping them out, what are some of the best practices you see when it comes to messaging to developers? The biggest thing,
especially like that we do in the outbound motion, is this idea of like niching down. So what we saw pretty early on, when you talk with founders of developer tools companies, you talk to all those different types of companies, the first idea is, hey, we can sell to any team that has a software engineering team, and we can solve all of their problems. And it's hard to create repeatability that way. And it's hard to really tell a story that makes sense from company to company. And so one thing that we really like to do is this idea of niching down. So really focusing on a specific persona, specific type of person, type of company, and trying to deeply understand the problems that they're dealing with, their day-to-day, and then figuring out, in the messaging of how we can, solve those problems. So a lot of that is social proof as well. I think developers want to see, hey, this other engineering team at a similar type company is using a specific product to solve this problem. And so with the messaging itself, it's one, being super curious, trying to really like understand what they're trying to solve for, but also doing enough research and doing enough personalization to say, hey, this is, based on the companies that we've helped, we figured you might be dealing with these same types of issues. We'd love to have a conversation. If it's not a fit, no worries. Like, we're not going to try to force you into anything, force to sell you anything, but we want to be here to help, possibly help solve problems that you might be dealing with. So the messaging is a little bit different than, that typical sales email or that sales outreach that you'd get. It's more, hey, we have this really great product. We'd love your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And, we'd love to explore if there's an opportunity here to help.
Got it. And along the same lines, I mean, there is a lot of common knowledge that like the developer community hate sales, right? Or at least bad for marketing, right? And when you have similar playbooks where the DevTool teams, the sales teams are outreaching, say, developers, right? What are the things that you remember? And how should they go about to an audience which sort of is averse to sales and marketing?
Yeah. I think so. There's a couple of things, like when it comes to sales and marketing in a whole, I think it's really important to become product or like industry experts. And so kind of everything that you're funneling on the marketing side of things, the content on the blog, the content on social media, it should be providing value to, to the types of people that you're reaching out to, so that they can easily find that information and answer questions themselves by going to kind of read that content. So that's one kind of approach that I think every developer tools company should be focusing on. And then the other piece, and this is why, a little plug here, like why Rio is such a valuable product, is developers aren't living in their email like a founder, like, someone like myself is on the sales side. So it's important to meet them where they're at. And that could be X/Twitter, that could be GitHub, it could be Discord communities. And it's important to kind of like really understand the customer and understand, where they want to communicate in the first place. So email isn't always going to be best. And like, I'm sure a lot of people on the sales side of things, email has changed a lot over the last couple of years. We're not relying on that solely. It's kind of this multi-channel approach and finding where the developers are spending most of their time and trying to reach them there.
Got it. And that brings me to a sort of logical next step. Yes, you are trying to meet the developers where they are active, etc. And there are a lot of sort of intent signals in those kind of activities that sort of developers are doing. I was just curious as to, what are some of these intent signals that you have seen working for organizations? If there are ways where organizations or DevTool companies can look at these intent signals of developers for their GTM moves.
Yeah, and there's a lot too. But they all kind of, funnel into one another and tell a story in a sense. So like intent signals could be hiring for a specific role, and within that role, they're looking for someone with specific technology expertise. And so on the outbound side of things, tracking those job changes, understanding what they're looking for, and that could be an indicator for, whatever product that you're selling. So job postings is a big one. As far as like intent signals, and this is something, again, that Rio does, is like understanding, because a lot of these developers, a lot of the people you're selling to are going to be doing their own kind of self-learning and self-exploration. So one big thing that we see is, on doc sites, pretty much every developer tools company should or has a doc site that kind of lets people, go out on their own and figure out the product. But even within that, there's specific docs pages that will tell you something, right? Like there's specific pages that can kind of be a really good indicator that this is an enterprise or a larger company project. Whereas there could be other pages where, hey, this is a side project that they're just doing on their own. And kind of tracking that and bubbling that up is really an important indicator as a salesperson, because then you can kind of, figure out the story, kind of like figure out the problems that they might be running into, and cater your messaging around that as well.
Got it. Let's come to some of the advice that, you work with a lot of DevTool startups. What are the starting grounds? What are the kind of advice that you give them commonly, which sort of, they start implementing, like the 5 most important things that sort of somebody needs for getting started, and you see them, then again, really useful.
Yeah. So, a lot of the startups, like I talked about it a little bit earlier, of like this idea of niching down. And, what we do with our startups that we're working with is we're doing a lot of testing. Like there's a lot of, you have a hypothesis on the particular company that you want to go after, the persona, but you don't really know that until you have more conversations and you kind of see what messaging works. And so, when we first start working with founders and developer tools companies, we do a lot of testing to see kind of what sticks and what doesn't. And then from there, like best practices is from the first moment that you do start having these conversations, it's not a sales call. It's early stage, and our goal is to be as curious as possible and truly understand what customers want, and trying to take that feedback, take those conversations, and creating like a voice of the customer type of funnel, so that not only is it the salesperson that's the only person hearing this feedback, but that feedback is also funneling to engineering. It's funneling to marketing, to the founders, to every single person on the team, so that you can start building a story around the types of people and the types of problems that you're trying to solve. So that voice of the customer type process, or that, I guess, yeah, that's usually a best practice that we always are trying to implement. And that kind of goes with like the collaboration piece, like everyone rowing in the same direction. Sales, marketing, engineering is really important at that early stage, because at this stage as well, marketing, engineering, they're your salespeople as well, because they're in the Discord communities, they're on Twitter. And so you want everyone kind of telling the same story and, communicating, so there's no silos in the organization.
No, I agree. I mean, I think there is tremendous impact in sort of the various departments communicating the same story and sort of collaborating. How do you do that? Because if you see, selling to a developer or technical buyer or selling a developer tool, you actually need a lot of collaboration between such teams. You need sort of the content coming the right way, the marketing team sort of targeting in the right manner, and then sort of the SDRs who are outreaching. What are some of the best practices you recommend that, various teams can come together and work? Because I believe it's a big problem for any organization in sort of orchestrating various teams together.
Yeah. So the one thing that you want to avoid, and I just mentioned, is this idea of silos. So a lot of engineers, a lot of marketing folks, typically like salespeople have the sales conversations, and then salespeople go to the other like product, engineering, and marketing and say, hey, we need this, we need this, we need this. At this stage, and a lot of growing startups, like, what we did such a great job at Gatsby was any sales call, you had access to our product team, your marketing team, engineering, and you could bring them in, and they were part of the conversation. And I think that builds an amazing customer facing culture, because it's the companies that are evaluating their product, they realize, hey, we're not just talking to a salesperson, we're talking to the experts that built the product. We can reach out to them anytime. And so, like, when you are able to kind of bring all your forces into the sales process and into the conversations, it not only provides like that world-class customer support, but it removes like the sales stigma as well. And it also allows everyone on your team to kind of hear exactly what the customers are saying.
Got it. Perhaps the last question, but Luke, I asked this to all the guests here is, what are some of the best books, podcasts, resources that you recommend for sales teams of developer-focused companies?
Great question. So there's a couple. One of the best sales books, it's actually a really easy read, but for anyone on the sales side of things, a lot of sales is just the process and setting up your day and making sure that you're tracking the right things. And there's this book called Sell with Swagger. It's what it's called after that is the Quick Hit Guide to Crushing Your Quota. So sounds like a very salesy book, but what it does is it's a very practical way for any founder or salesperson to kind of set up their day and really set up their system so that they're, getting in front of, who they want to be going after. And then the other two that I think are really great, just for the community and understanding the space, is the Craft of Open Source podcasts. They always have really cool companies on there. Always learn something new as well, of just kind of what's up and coming. And then I always like looking at the Runa Capital Open Source Report, which is like a quarterly report where shows all the up and coming, the hottest open source companies. And you can learn a lot in that too. You'll see there's a lot of open source AI type companies in these latest reports. And so there's a lot of trends and things you can learn.
Amazing. Thanks, Luke. This has been great. And, I got to learn a lot. Yeah. And thanks again for being here on this podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.